Welcome to episode 2 of the Spinoza Triad. Is or was Donald Trump leading a crusade against an international conspiracy of paedophilic, Marxist, Leninist, child-smuggling wardrobe salesmen? Were the 9/11 attacks on the Twin Towers in New York orchestrated by the American government themselves? Were the moon landings fabricated in a Hollywood studio? The answer to these questions is no, obviously not. That would be stupid to believe such things and downright insane. So why do a surprisingly large number of people believe such absurd ideas, given the overwhelming ease with which one can access evidence to show the contrary? Why in this time of hitherto unachieved levels of education do people believe mad things? Are they simply misinformed? Is the proportion of the population simply not paying proper attention? Are they indeed insane? Or to put it another way, one Scotch egg short of a packed lunch? Are they victims of an echo chamber, internet, and fake news? Is it simply that we have failed to teach sufficiently sophisticated evaluative skills, given our children the capacity, and adults thereafter, the capacity for proper evidential training? Or is the answer to be found in the darker, peripheral vision of the human psyche? As every week, the Spinoza Triad will conduct an unscripted discussion using the guidance of a particular theorist or philosopher. This week, who better to choose when delving into the dark recesses of the human psyche than Carl Gustav Jung? He lived from 1875 to 1961 and has left a legacy that has influenced popular culture, literature, our understanding of our own culture, and of course, therapeutic analytical psychiatry. I hope you enjoy it. The task was to think about Jungian psychoanalysis, analytical psychology, and conspiracy theory.
Which I struggled with.
I can tell you why I've made that connection.
Well, John, what did you think of Jung first, and Dan? Because I'll be interested to know what you both think. John, what did you think of him?
Well, if I chart the process of my thinking about him, so Jung, the collective consciousness wasn't strange, interconnected, metaphysical world of connected minds. You know, I knew that essentially what collective consciousness was a universally true ways of which human beings think and see and structure the world that we all share because we're all human beings. Not unsurprisingly, because we kind of look similar, we're also going to think similarly. That's close to what collective consciousness is. So the more I read about it this week, I sort of appreciate that's true. And I think that's a very useful way of looking at the world. Then I thought, I know the word archetype are, again, different ways of projecting our own conscious understanding of ourselves into the world. So in this sense, our minds provide a structure which structures the world. We aren't born into the world with a tabula rasa, or a blank mind. We have, from the collective unconscious, a template, a structure of human cognition, which provides us with a means of mapping through language and symbols, through a language of symbols, which are the archetypes, a means by which we can understand the world we encounter and provide us with that template.
Is his point that it's unconscious, that it's an unconscious structure, that you're not conscious of it, and it formulates what you can know? I mean, I listen to Jordan Peterson when he talks about substructures, like a substructure, something where the mother complex was like, it was a sort of almost like a set of coordinates. You come to understand what the concept of mother is, and then it's collective insofar as it has its own history. Like there's a history of a mythological dimension to what we mean by mother, and there are sets of stories or narratives of which to understand this by.
Yes, absolutely, I agree. Provide the template, the structural template for that mythologizing function which creates the map by which we understand the world. We do, I think, have to be careful not to fall into a kind of reductionism or determinism. In other words, there isn't a form of mother, a kind of Platonic form of mother, which we should adhere to. On the other hand, it also shouldn't be reduced down to one form of mother. The archetypal mother isn't the way it should be. It's, on the other hand, a complex symbolism which we will construct culture by culture and history by history.
I thought he's almost quite a modern thinker, because if you change some of the language and you're thinking evolutionary biology or neuroscience, he's basically saying that the unconscious is it's rich and deep, and it's largely it's hereditary and it's genetic, if you like.
Absolutely, Richard. I completely agree. I think that that is one of the, or is the great and particularly brilliant insight of Jungian analysis. This bit of human experience, the Industrial Revolution about 200 years old, living in cities about 10,000 years old, hundreds of thousands of years of human existence prior to that, out of which our ways, our frames of reference, our ways of thinking, our brains were shaped to deal with that world and not this one. It's that idea that all human beings, we all share a common reservoir of cognitive structuring that we've inherited. And I think understanding of genetics, and particularly epigenetics, the relationship between genetics and the environment, has given us a real brilliant insight into this. I doubt, and I'm sure it's not true, that complex archetypal images and symbols can be directly inherited, but I think we can have a transmission of the landscape in which those archetypes can be formulated commonly across mankind. For instance, the common archetype of the hero. It's oddly true how the representation of heroes in mythology, in films, in popular culture, and in our imagination are similar across time and across culture.
This archetype of a hero that overcomes himself, defeats the dragon. It's really everywhere, isn't it? From Beowulf, it's in the Bible. That's Rocky IV, isn't it? Any of the Rocky stories. They were on TV the other night again, and it was this is just the hero's journey again. He's got the trickster, he's got people trying to take him away from the path, and he has something he has to overcome, and then it's really himself that he has to become the best version of him. It seems that these Jungian archetypes are kind of everywhere.
For instance, the heroes have similar sort of characteristics. The hero is possessed of some kind of special power, even if that special power, even if it's not warrior skills or ability to fly or look through walls, it's the ability to see things that other people don't quite get. Even if it's just the only power they've got is an awareness of something that other people can't see or refuse to see. That in turn makes them an outsider. It separates them. It makes them sad. It makes them go off. They operate on some place beyond where other people go on. They go on quests. They're often assisted, and so you get this sort of narrative, common narratives of hero, common features of hero. One of the things I used to do in my old comms lessons was ask students, how do heroes stand? And I would adopt a position where my shoulders would be sort of hunched forward, and I'd fiddle with my fingers, and that wouldn't be heroic. But if I sort of threw my head back and looked somewhere on the horizon in the middle distance, that was how heroes stood. How do we know that? I mean, learned it environmentally, or did we inherit it genetically, or something between the two? And I think that's because the hero, we understand what kind of landscape that hero operates on a boundary. Maybe it's the coast, maybe it's the edge of things, maybe it's that bit of the city the rest of us won't go into. And that's why I think boundary zones, the great boundary zone, the great pattern boundary zone, is life and death itself. And that's represented in the world, our understanding of the importance of, say, of seas and edges, of cliff faces, of people who are prepared to step into the void or step off into the void, people who go to places we wouldn't want to go. People will be married on beaches, people will be or take their holidays walking along cliff edges. People feel edge places, boundaries, even doorways to houses, boundaries to inside and outside. After gardens are where we're buried, gardens are where we're married, gardens surround churches, gardens surround our houses, and gardens, after all, are a boundary between domestic world, the domestic interior world, and the great wild world of nature. Gardens operate as a boundary on that. And I think it's on those boundary patterns that heroes operate. And not unsurprisingly, whether it's the wandering knight or the samurai or the lone gunman of Santa Fe, the hero, or Iron Man, the hero has a curious similarity. Making the connection with conspiracy theory. So if people have a suspicion that the world isn't the way it appears, that's actually quite a sensible way to behave for much of human existence. In other words, to be somewhat suspicious of the stranger, to be somewhat suspicious of what they say, to not take things at face value, is actually a very useful survival guide. So no wonder that we have a psychological inclination to doubt and suspect things, and that doesn't take you all the way to conspiracy theories, but it takes you to a way of thinking about the world which actually could be both quite useful and quite dangerous.
I think that's Jung's strong point. That's what I like about psychoanalysis, is the recognition of dark forces. But and they're not always dark, you know, they can be quite positive as well, can't they? Some sort of drives and impulses. But the way I understood him was that it was a move beyond Freud. And by that, you know, Freud's interested in sort of sex drives, and the id it just seems more chaotic. Whereas Jung, from my understanding of this, he really does look into the unconscious from a variety of, like you say, with different stories, narratives, histories, myths, and almost builds up a kind of architecture of an unconscious. And it has it's far more sophisticated than Freud's, isn't it, I think?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, one of the things that's very different, as you say, the id for Freud is a chaotic series of base instincts, barely controllable sort of volcano of lust and desire that you sit on top of. Whereas for Jung, there's this thing, this archetypal shadow. And shadow is that bit you don't wish to acknowledge in yourself. Dark, quite controversially in a way, because Jordan Peterson gets in trouble with many people, because he says, you know, you also need to embrace this. That can mean for men, embrace the violent side of your person. In other words, violence, aggression can be good and in fact necessary. And that shadow landscape within people's psyche gives rise to, well, the anti-hero, the kind of dirty Harry figure, the Bruce Willis figure in all those Bruce Willis films, superhero who has to be separate from society because of that darker, self-destructive or even destructive side to their personality. That the hero is flawed, and that the flaws are his strength and his separation and his weakness, is the format, is the landscape within which the anti-hero archetype can exist. On the other hand, violence, aggression, you know, can be deeply unpleasant and terrifying, and especially in yourself. So how do you deal with the shadow archetype within your own self, the unknown bit of yourself? You know, having a persona, the mask you put on, is actually very, very useful in the world. We don't really want everyone to see inside our own heads, God forbid.
We need a level of deceit. Even the idea of good manners is deceitful, isn't it? It's not really what you're actually thinking about when you open a door for someone or say please and thank you. You're not being sincere.
Yeah. You know, we want to be able to act and pretend, and that actually is necessary for us to function. So from Freud, he takes the idea that you're not the master of your own house. You don't entirely understand what's in your head. On the other hand, that for Jung, that can be quite useful or destructive depending on how you apply, you know, how you understand it, apply it.
How can it be useful if you don't know what it is and you can't pin it down?
Well, I'm guessing that Jungian psychoanalysis helps you to find out that, you know, by acknowledging that there is this within you, it becomes useful.
I had this, I read it a few years ago actually on holiday. It's owning your own shadow, understanding the dark side of the psyche. Robert A. Johnson is pretty good, but it's a bit vague. They talk a lot about shadow work, don't they? So what you're describing there, John, is where you would try and, I think it's like recognizing that things can go quite bad for you, and I think you are capable of doing quite bad things, I suppose. Part of that kind of shadow work.
Well, I'm guessing that coaching or training people in mixed martial arts or boxing or anything of that kind gives you an insight into how to utilize and control shadow. I mean, if Mike Tyson bites someone's ear off or whatever he tried to do, he's clearly not entirely in control of his shadow, is he? You know, there's a level of aggression that he doesn't fully understand.
Definitely needed some shadow work around that period.
I'd say so. So could do with a bit of Jungian analysis there.
Could it be that we symbolize the things we want to do? So we can almost imagine dark thoughts without actually living them through. Is that where he's going? That's a bit like Freud. Does this shadow become a kind of symbol by which we learn to accept or avoid things?
What I find interesting here is this relationship between Jung's shadow and Lacan's real. And the difference is that you can come to know the shadow and your own shadow, and Jung has various narratives for making. Again, it's that relationship between order and chaos. for the Jungian, you can come to know the unconscious or the shadow through shadow work, and there are these various narratives and stories of which to know that which you don't know. You kind of work through this. I feel like with the Lacanian sort of Zizek kind of model, that this real actually affects all that you can know, but you can never know it. It's at the edge of what is knowable, and that nothingness shapes everything you can know. A bit like an artist will use negative space, negative pictures to draw up what they're trying to draw.
So it's a bit like Freud. It's a renunciation of all that can be known through, let's say, like killing the primal father. So the primal horde killing the primal father. The primal father represents everything that is possible. But if everything was possible, society wouldn't exist. So we have a sense of things being forbidden, being prohibited, in order for us to, it's the prohibition that allows us to, to interact socially.
I think they both had this idea of killing the father, don't they? Like Lacan has the name of the father he talks about, doesn't he? And that's that sort of, it's authority, isn't it? And then for Jung, they again, part of that idea of slaying the father in order to become.
This kind of paradox that if we're forbidden to do things, we actually are able to create society. And at the moment, we've got a situation whereby prohibition is seen as if it's a bad thing, and we've got excessive freedom and compulsion to enjoy, which is leading to a sense of alienation and distance between not only events but people.
Yeah, Dan, if I can just pick up on that phrase you just used, the alienation from events. I think that's a wonderfully contemporary and topical idea, the view that people live in worlds of complexity which they can barely understand. Often it's said that we don't understand the economic forces, the global forces, and that people living in small towns in rural United States don't understand why the jobs kind of have vanished, or people don't understand why the climate might be changing. And if we place it in the bigger psychoanalytical context of people not understanding themselves and not understanding their own minds in the post-God world, I doubt that incomprehension was anything other than universal in the human condition. Since entropy is the natural order of the universe, things fall apart. But once upon a time, as it were, if I can use that sort of a narrative idea, once upon a time in medieval times at least, people might have had the consolation of a world order with God in his heaven and the devil in his hell, and somewhere we were between the two and we understood the workings of the medieval universe. In this world, though, in the post-God world, how do we understand our position within the world? Well, we might attempt, if I can draw this back to conspiracy theories, to place ourselves as the hero, the narrative hero in that story, the one who perceives the truth that other people don't see. I also might place it within a world of chaos in the sense of being alienated from it. So the thing I see is the fears I project on the world. Well, aren't we describing QAnon?
I did think last night, if you look at the archetypes with Jung, one of the archetypes is the trickster. And it was really the trickster being the thing that tries to fool you or doesn't allow you to see it. He talks about sort of Native American cultures, and then you see it explained in a few different ways. But this idea of that there is an archetypal structure of a trickster, of something which is there to try and fool you or lead you to a different, it's usually signified by a crafty animal like a coyote or this kind of thing.
The trickster is going to appear in Christian idea through the devil, who's also the great deceiver, and in other religions there is a figure in Hindu religion, figure in ancient Egyptian religion, and also the gods themselves in the classical world are deceivers and tricksters, and they're always fooling people, turning into animals and fooling people, or being vengeful and vindictive.
I saw a little clip with Joseph Campbell saying that the trickster is always trying to overthrow order. So again, you've got this dualism between chaos and order, and the trickster is trying to where order is being you imagine sort of imposition of various archetypes that give sort of a young man the hero's journey. The trickster is to try and get rid of that. So I didn't know if not if some, especially within politics, you see that.
Absolutely, Richard. It's a vivid characteristic of politics is the problem of discovering or finding or knowing the difference between the trickster and the hero. How is the devil represented? The devil is often represented as being rather looking a bit like a goat. He's horned, he's got long features. You can see in all sorts of anti-Semitic literature in the Middle Ages how Jews were portrayed as looking like the devil. And you bring that right the way down history, can find in the Middle Ages the slaughtering of Jewish people because of some rumor that some child had been killed, or the Eastern European belief that Jews used people's blood, children's blood, to leaven their bread, down to the mid-20th century, and you've got an international conspiracy of capitalist and communist Jews who are somehow allied together to overthrow Germany or to undermine Western civilizations. It's as insane to believe that as it is to believe in QAnon. That difficulty in telling the difference between pretense and reality, between good and evil, forms the basis of drama, from Shakespeare to the ancient Greeks to Game of Thrones, House of Cards. I mean, the trickster, the anti-hero, the hero, and the difficulty we have in finding out who they are and the differences between them and the overlapping similarities between them. Goodness me, that's the basis of most drama. And certainly it's a way we perceive the world and perceive politics. For some, clearly, the QAnon lunatics, Donald Trump is the hero, and for others, he's a trickster.
But yeah. I think in my 20s, John, I suffered from most of my mates with the trickster. I would try and tell Nicky I wasn't going to the pub, but they'd trick me into it.
Jungian ideas, Freudian ideas, Lacanian analysis is very useful in appreciating this kind of material world of post-God world, and what do you do in a world where those mysterious things you can't explain, the world is largely inexplicable to us, is still frightening.
The individual is capable of great good, but evil and bad. The great mother is both the caring, loving earth mother, but also the evil stepmother and the tyrannical, overbearing mother. The Ouroboros, again, that image that's first used to symbolize, I think it's just creational before creation, but it's both matter and spirit. I think that's quite, I don't want to use the word yin yang, but it kind of is, isn't it? Yeah, why not? Yeah.
We fall into ourselves and our own privacy. So we don't want the outside world to interfere. We become less radical, less political, because all that is something to do with something external to the individual. So we've got kind of individualism on stilts at the moment.
But it's an individualism, though, without any form of responsibility, isn't it? There's that relationship between Nietzsche and Jung. Nietzsche talks about the death of God, and really what then do human beings do when there's no authority, like you said. And Jung deals with that, because rather than just Nietzsche, would be something whereby you have this individualism, but there's a responsibility there to have your own, overcome yourself, to be the best version of yourself and confront your various values. And Jung provides, I think, some answer as to why that becomes more difficult. You're not just dealing with yourself, you're dealing with a collective unconscious which stems back forever. So it's not just an autonomous choice to do something. I think that's maybe Jung's strength. And if you're not careful with Jung, it seems like he dangles this new religious promise, which I don't know if it's there. Lacan embraces that negativity, that real, that void or gap, chaos. And Jung tries to explain it.
Aren't we, I don't think I invented this idea, but aren't we human beings
run with it, John.
Take it. Yeah. I don't think I invented this idea. So I'm not going to claim some brilliant insight here. Yeah. The pattern-seeking ape. I forget who said that, but that's what we are. Unlike other creatures on this planet. But what makes us different is that we see patterns. We look into clouds and we see faces, but we also look into the chaotic world around us and start shaping it into species. Linnaeus looks at plants and animals and starts turning them into species and different connections. And we look at elements and we divide them into different elemental types. We look at human organization, or we look at our own psychology and we start shaping it into archetypes.
Isn't that what conspiracy theories are doing anyway? They're just going one step further than most.
Absolutely, I think that's right. I think what the conspiracy theory is doing is our innate tendency to look for patterns is both extraordinarily good. If we didn't do that, we couldn't organize the world around us. It would all just be chaotic. We couldn't even organize our own thoughts. Finding patterns is essential. And yet seeing patterns where they don't exist, or inventing them, can become dangerous. I mean, it's the other side of the coin. That if I project onto the world my fears, that can become extraordinarily dangerous. You know, it's a bit like the two sides of a stereotype. Stereotype can be really useful. It's a shorthand way of understanding people I haven't met. But also stereotypes can be extremely dangerous when they become racial stereotypes.
Both extremes of, looking for patterns in things can lead to a form of insanity.
Well, when you were a child, did you never look at this patterned wallpaper or something and wonder if there were faces in it?
Yeah.
And then at some point get frightened? I don't know. That may just be me.
I still do it.
You're kind of, it's fine. Your imagination can conjure a face out of the patterned wallpaper. The criticism of Jung that you could have which is why it's so embraced by advertisers and it's so embraced by management people and organizational theorists. You can see lots of stuff online about using recognizing archetypes as a means of kind of developing your organization. And what kind of archetype are you, and such like, are you the wizard, are you the helper, are you the regular guy, are you the assistant, or whatever it is, or are you the magician? And therefore it falls into a kind of rather simplistic form of self-help book. Dealing with aggression, well, then you recognize it. That's, I think, why some aspects of Jungian analysis can enter popular culture quite easily, as Freud has done, actually.
I think what I like about this is again, we've looked at a few people now, haven't we, where it's this idea of knowing this is unknown has a collective character to it that all human beings experience. And like you said at the beginning, John, not on a metaphysical level, but just as something that everyone experiences.
Because we're all human. Like, it's probably true, it's almost certainly true, that when we look at this color red, I can't know whether you're seeing red the way I see red, but I know we all agree that thing, that whatever that is, that electromagnetic stimulus called light, registers red in all three of us. So we've agreed that is red, even though I can't be certain that that's what you see. But it's probably true that we are seeing something similar, at the very least. In that sense, our interpretation of the world symbolically, our understanding of it, our fears will relate not unsimilarly to similar mythology, similar patterns, so that the stories of the ancient Greeks, of myths told through time, are going to be not unsimilar to the latest blockbuster on Netflix. You know, they're going to have structures and heroes and villains and helpers, and they're going to explore underlyingly dark forces of fear and suspicion. That, for instance, that film The Purge, or the Purge film. The films The Purge are simply a proposition, and I don't think it's a proposition that's particularly true, but it is, if you took away the restraining forces of society, we'd all set upon each other like wild ravening animals if we were given the chance. I'm certain that isn't true, but it's certainly a suspicion we all have, and it's certainly been appreciated in time that there are moments when quite ordinary people can do really awful things.
It's happened, John, but it wasn't. We didn't run around killing each other. We went for the toilet rolls, wasn't it? Got those instead on a purge.
My dad told me a story once. This is true. This is him in World War II. How he was in World War II, and it was in that bit of North Africa where the Germans are retreating quite quickly, and so they were moving from camp to camp quite fast. And they arrived at a camp, and they set up their tents and such like. But 2 soldiers among their company had been badly injured and died while they were there. So they buried them in shallow graves, marked the graves. And what the idea was that if those men never were found, they at least had a burial. And if they were, later on, people following behind would disinter them and take them off to a war grave. So they mark their graves, they say a few words, and they all get in their truck again and they're off. And as they're leaving the camp, 2 ragged Algerian, Tunisian, Arab men run forward and start digging at the sand in order to get their boots or their belts or whatever it is they can trade, because they're absolutely starving, these people. and they can trade or wear or whatever. You know, there was these Westerners had buried these men in their clothes and boots and belts, and they were valuable. So they start digging at them, and the last truck, as it's leaving, they see this. The guys ran forward to the graves too quickly in a way, because the sergeant on the truck shouts, "Stop!" And they stop the truck. He gets out, walks up the path back to the camp, pulls out his revolver and shoots them both in the head. And I thought, well, if that guy survived the war, and he's a butcher or a baker or a candlestick maker or whoever he is, what does he say when someone says, "Well, Harold, how was the war for you? You know, what did you do in North Africa?" What does he say?
Oh dear, yeah.
He never talk about that, you know, or just say, "Well, you know, it was a bit this, bit of that, you know, you did what you did."
Oh dear, yeah.
I doubt he's a psychopath. He's probably never going to kill anyone again. Maybe he never did anything like that again in the whole rest of the war.
Wow, yeah.
Is there one thing I was going to ask earlier, I didn't have a chance, but a lot of these accounts of psychoanalysis and everything, they want to kind of, you know, move away from guilt, you know, and even in our modern world, we've lost a relationship with guilt. Thinking about that story you've just said, does the guy feel guilty? Or, you know, we're always told, I mean, we live in this age where we're not really responsible for things or ourselves. And if you're responsible, you've got to feel guilty sometimes. So sometimes does guilt have a good effect on the human psyche or not?
Well, there's a question for us about that story. If you met this guy, would you say, well, you know, you should atone for that, you should feel guilty? Or would you say, well, you're as much a victim of this situation as the
well, that's why I asked the question. If we say that you're a victim, then no one can be ever responsible with him. We remain as children throughout our lives. What I'm saying badly, that guilt has got a bad press at the moment, but is it a necessary regulator of the human psyche?
But wouldn't Jung say that replace the word guilt with the shadow?
Yeah.
Is actually sort of coming to terms with that. So you wouldn't say to this man, you're not the victim of that situation, but you do have to understand what that was about you. There's some kind of recognition. Yeah. That's probably what a Jungian analyst would say to this guy, should he ever turn up on a couch and recount.
Well, how far would you go? You know, you were capable of much worse than you think.
Yeah.
I think perhaps that would be like.
I'm going to make the connection there with conspiracy theories, because if you believe that's true, and there's a suspicion, probably exaggerated by films like The Purge, but there's a suspicion that human beings, and indeed we, who knows, we suspect this about ourselves, are capable of appalling things, then it's possible then to believe all sorts of strange and terrible things about the world, such as there's an international network of paedophiles.
I don't know if psychologically human beings have been so impacted now with constant imagery, just images on phones, that it's having, or on screens all the time. How much someone in this period now has an imagination, the sheer amount of screens and images and things that you see that aren't really there anyway. It's already there for you. If you like, the imagination is virtualized and given back to you. So you don't have to. It's almost like canned laughter. It laughs for you. And the screen gives you the images for you now. Think how different life would have been then. I was trying to explain to the kids the other day what life was like before the internet and phones. You know, I went and saw my mates after school. It was like, you know, you might make a phone call. You just go in and knocked on somebody and you saw them. If they weren't in, Mum would say, you know, no, he's not in.
Although the other day when I was listening to the television, they said something like, well, next week we'll all be free to go out and shop. And I thought, oh yeah, that's what freedom is. You have been down the intellectual rabbit hole with John Gibbs, Dan Rowland and Richard Miller, the Spinoza Triad. Hope you enjoyed it. We certainly did.